She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Machines were failing, and the doctors had already shaken their heads. But just outside her hospital room, a man she never met whispered 6 words. And what happened next? No one could explain. Her name is Rachel. She was 39, a single mother, school teacher, the kind of woman people described as strong without trying to be. She wasn't flashy, didn't post much, didn't ask for attention. She just gave to her students, to her son, to her church, to strangers. But even strong women can collapse. It started with shortness of breath. A small thing at first. She thought maybe it was stress or allergies. She kept pushing through like she always did. But within days, it spiraled. Chest pain, fatigue, blackouts. And one Friday morning, her son, 11 years old, found her on the kitchen floor, barely conscious. She was rushed to the ER, and that's when everything started slipping. The diagnosis wasn't simple. It wasn't neat. Doctors weren't sure if it was viral or autoimmune, but what they knew was this. Her body was shutting down, one system at a time. First her lungs, then her kidneys, then her heart rhythm started acting erratic. She was placed into a medically induced coma by Saturday night, and by Sunday morning, they called the family in. Now, I didn't know Rachel. Not then, not in any real sense. I had seen her at a service once or twice, but we'd never spoken. I didn't know her story. Didn't know she had a son. Didn't know that she'd been holding so much together with so little support. But that morning, as I sat in the hospital lobby, waiting to visit someone else entirely, I felt something. A nudge. A tug. Something deep in my chest that said, "Go to the ICU." I didn't even know what room. Didn't know who I'd find. But I've walked with God long enough to know, when He stirs your spirit like that, you don't ignore it. So I walked. Slow. Unsure. Not wanting to look like I didn't belong. I passed a few nurses. No one stopped me. Then, about halfway down the hallway, I saw him. A boy, maybe 11, sitting on the floor outside a room. Alone. Hunched over. Clutching a book, a Bible. Way too tight for a kid his age. I stopped. He looked up at me. Eyes red, face blank. And before I could say anything, he asked me 4 words I'll never forget. "Do you believe in prayer?" I knelt down beside him. Didn't answer right away. Just nodded. He pointed to the door behind him. "That's my mom," he said. "They said she's not waking up." Then, quieter. "But I asked God to send somebody. I think maybe that's you." I didn't have a script. Didn't have a plan. But I stood up, laid my hand gently on the door frame, closed my eyes, and said 6 words I didn't prepare. "God, interrupt what man has declared." That's all. Just that. No theatrics. No shouting. No deep theology. Just 6 words. And silence. What happened next? Well, I'll tell you in the next part. But let me say this. You don't always need to know who you're praying for. You don't even need the right words. You just need to say them, and let heaven do what only heaven can do. 6 words. That's all I prayed. God, interrupt what man has declared. Then I opened my eyes. The boy was still sitting there, shoulders slumped, eyes full of too much pain for someone his age. I didn't expect anything. I didn't feel anything supernatural. No warm wave, no tremble in my hands, just quiet. And I thought, maybe that's all I was meant to do. But God wasn't finished. About 10 minutes later, as I was walking back toward the lobby, a nurse rushed past me in the opposite direction, clipboard in hand. Walk turned to jog. Then another. Then a call over the speaker. Something had changed. I didn't know it yet, but I'd later learn the exact moment I finished that prayer. Rachel's heart rate stabilized. The machines that had been screaming with red alerts flattened into a steady rhythm. The oxygen levels that had dipped below survival started to rise, and her kidneys, which hadn't responded to any medication in over 36 hours, suddenly started working again. No one had touched her. No new medication had been given. No new procedure. Just prayer. I didn't know this until hours later. I went home that day not knowing if anything had changed. But the next morning, I got a call. It was from the pastor of our small church. He said, "You won't believe this. Remember Rachel? She woke up." My knees buckled. I sat down right there in my hallway, not in shock, but in awe. Because I hadn't prayed a long prayer. I hadn't even gone in the room. But somehow, God had met her anyway. Later, Rachel herself would tell the story. And what she remembered was even more miraculous. She said she didn't know where she was. Everything was dark. It felt like she was floating, but heavy, like something was trying to pull her away. But then she heard a voice she didn't recognize, male, calm, clear. It said, "God's not done. Come back." And then light. She woke up surrounded by machines, a nurse crying, and her son screaming her name. That voice? She swore it wasn't a dream, said it was more real than the hospital room, said it was like time stopped, just long enough for heaven to speak louder than death. And when she heard those words, everything changed. I never told her it might have been connected to that moment in the hallway, that simple prayer. It didn't matter, because it wasn't about me. It was about a God who still intervenes, a God who still hears whispered prayers, a God who still sends strangers to open doors no man can shut. You see, people think miracles have to be big, loud, obvious, but sometimes they're small, hidden, tucked into quiet hallways and trembling prayers, and they still split heaven open. After Rachel woke up, no one quite knew what to say. The hospital staff used words like unexplained turnaround, medically rare, spontaneous systemic recovery. But Rachel? She used different words. She called it mercy I didn't ask for, but was given anyway. Her body had started to stabilize. The coma was lifted gradually, machines disconnected one by one. She still had pain. She still needed therapy. But everything that was once shutting down was now coming back, piece by piece. The doctors stood amazed. The nurses wept with her son. And Rachel, the woman who was supposed to die that night, was sitting up in bed by day 3. But what caught everyone off guard was what she remembered. She told the pastor, the nurses, and later, me. I didn't dream it. I wasn't hallucinating. It was clearer than anything I've ever lived through. I was in a place that wasn't here, but I wasn't alone. She described a kind of peace that had weight, that wrapped around her like light, a place that didn't hurt, where time didn't exist. But there was something else. She said there was a presence, one that didn't speak right away, didn't shout, didn't even call her by name. It just stood with her, until the moment when it leaned close, and whispered, "God's not done. Come back." She remembered asking, "Who are you?" But there was no answer, only peace. And then a sound, mechanical, sharp, the beep of a heart monitor, and she opened her eyes. Rachel never claimed to know whether the voice was an angel or Jesus himself, or the echo of someone praying nearby. She didn't try to package it. She just knew it was real, and it had called her back. What struck me most when I finally sat across from her, weeks later at church, as she sipped tea with a blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, wasn't just her survival. It was her softness, the way she carried peace now, like someone who had been to the edge of eternity and returned with something you can't learn from sermons. She looked me in the eye and said, "I think someone prayed for me. Someone I'll never meet." And that's what tipped the scale. I smiled, and for a moment, I almost said it, almost told her. But then I paused, because it wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about me. It was about how God moves when someone listens, even in a hallway, even with no answers, even when the words are few. That prayer didn't come from confidence. It came from obedience. And obedience is often the beginning of a miracle. Rachel didn't waste her second chance. She could have disappeared, taken her son, packed up, and started fresh somewhere else. No one would have blamed her. But instead, she stayed in the same small town, the same school, the same church pew. But she wasn't the same woman, not even close. The Rachel who came back was slower, quieter, but somehow stronger. Not in the way people expect, not louder, not bolder. Stronger in stillness, stronger in presence. You could feel it when she walked into a room, like peace came with her, like she had seen something on the other side that most people only wonder about. And she didn't talk much about the hospital, not unless you asked. But if you did, she'd tell you every detail, not to impress, but to remind you God is still doing things you won't see on the news. Her story started to spread, first through the church, then through the town. People began asking questions. People who hadn't prayed in years. People who didn't believe in anything beyond science. They couldn't explain her recovery. The charts didn't make sense. The timing was too exact. And one of those people was her older brother, Lucas. Lucas hadn't stepped foot in church in 20 years. He called prayer emotional wishful thinking. Said religion was a crutch. He and Rachel were close once, before their parents passed, but life had pulled them in opposite directions. And when she almost died, he didn't visit. He didn't know how. But after her recovery, he showed up one Sunday morning, stood in the back, watched her sing with eyes closed, hands lifted. After the service, he pulled her aside. And for the first time in 2 decades, Lucas said, "I don't get it, but I can't explain it away either. Whatever happened to you, it's real, and I want to know the God who did it." Rachel cried, hugged him like a little sister would. And that night, in the quiet of her living room, Lucas prayed for the first time in his life. You never know what your healing will unlock for someone else, what your survival will stir in someone who's barely holding on, what your miracle will mean to someone who stopped believing they were possible. Rachel's second chance became Lucas's first faith. And that, to me, is the definition of redemption. And it all started with a boy outside a hospital room clutching a Bible. And a stranger, willing to pray 6 words without knowing why. A few months after Rachel's recovery, Our church held a simple gathering. Nothing fancy, no lights, no fog machines, just testimonies, stories. And Rachel stood up. She wasn't a public speaker, wasn't loud, didn't try to make it emotional. She just spoke with that quiet confidence people have when they've seen something too holy to explain away. She told the story, the shortness of breath, the coma, the whisper she heard in the dark. And then she said something that I don't think any of us will forget. I don't know who prayed that night. I don't know where they were standing, but I felt it. Not in my body, in my spirit, like something reached into the silence and pulled me back. The room was silent, not heavy, not tense, just still, like something sacred had passed through. I sat near the back, didn't stand, didn't speak. I didn't need to, because I wasn't the story. I was just part of the thread God used to sew a bigger one. And that's the thing about prayer. You never know where it lands. You just trust the one who hears it. Rachel went on to start a small prayer group for women in recovery, not just from illness, but from trauma, grief, silence. Lucas began mentoring young men who had never seen prayer as anything but weakness. And that young boy, her son, well, he's the one who reminds me most what real faith looks like. I prayed, and I waited, and God sent someone. Sometimes that's all it takes. And to the one watching this right now, you, yes, you, who's wondering if prayer still works, if it still matters, let me tell you, it does. Even the whisper, even the one you don't say out loud, even the one through tears, through anger, through fear. God hears every one, and sometimes He answers with silence, sometimes with peace, and sometimes with a stranger in a hallway who prays 6 words and opens the door for a miracle. Final prayer, Father, for the one listening who feels helpless, who thinks their prayers bounce off ceilings, remind them that you still hear, that you still move, that you still interrupt what man has declared. May their faith be renewed tonight. May their hope stretch a little further, and may their own story one day awaken someone else. Amen. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that prayer still matters, even when you don't feel strong, then I want to invite you to something simple. Subscribe to this channel, not for entertainment, not for noise, but for a sacred rhythm. This is a space for the weary and the waiting, for the quiet prayers and the big questions, for those who believe and those who want to believe again. Join us. We're walking this journey together. And stories like Rachel's, they're still happening. You just might be the next one.